Abate, E. Etal, 1998, a 1 million-year-old Homo cranium from the Danakil, Afar, Depression of Eritrea. Nature, 393, 6684 p. 458-60. Schmidt, P.R., M.C. Curtis and Z. Tika, 2008. The Archaeology of Ancient Eritrea. Trenton, New Jersey, Red Sea Press. Schmidt P.R. and Curtis M.C., 2001. Urban Precursors in the Horn, Early First Millennium BC Communities in Eritrea. Antiquity. 75, 298-49-859. Paul A., 2012. History of the Beja. Cambridge University Press. Schaff, W.H., 1912. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, Travel and Trade in the Indian Ocean, New York, Longmans, Green, and Konegish, T., 1990. Italian Colonialism in Eritrea, 1880-1941, Policies, Praxis, and Impact. Almqvist and Wicksell International A. Shami, H., 2018. Al-Manhul, The Sources in the History and Narrative of the Afar, Dinaki. Harmony Press. Cairo. Omer, M.K., 2020. The Dynamics of an Unfinished African Dream, Eritrea, Ancient History to 1968. Lulu Publishing Services. Miran, J., 2007. Power Without Pashas, The Anatomy of Autonomy in Ottoman Eritrea, 17th to 19th Century. Eritrean Studies Review 5, No. 1, 2007 33-88. Boardman, S., 1999. The Agricultural Foundation of the Aksumite Empire, Ethiopia, an Interim Report. The Exploitation of Plant Resources in Ancient Africa, pages 137-147. Philipson, D.D., 2012. Foundations of an African Civilization, Aksum and the Northern Horn, 1000 BC 1300 AD. Boydell and Brewer Limited Abink, J., 2014. Religious Freedom and the Political Order, the Ethiopian Secular State and the Containment of Muslim Identity Politics. Journal of Eastern African Studies, 8, 3, 346-365. Trimingham, J.S., 1952. Islam in Ethiopia. London, Geoffrey Cumberlegh. Chapter 2 Issues of Geography and Demography related to access to the sea in the Horn of Africa. Mibrato Atuburhan and Mohammed Kir Omer. Background as outlined in the main introduction section, the arguments put forward by Ethiopian elites to bolster the quest for ownership and/or access to the sea touch on four broad areas: history, geography/demography, law, and economy. This chapter focuses on the geography/demography aspect, as well as the closely related, ethnic aspect, as outlined below. The geography argument: Ethiopia's landlockedness has rendered it a prisoner of geography, limiting its interactions in the region and globally. This has impacted its security in a region that is becoming increasingly militarized. It has also increased transportation costs, including payments for port services, which will affect consumer prices. The demography argument: with a population of more than 120 million people, Ethiopia faces extreme population pressure, and its landlocked status exacerbates the population burden. The ethnic argument: an extension of the demography argument is that the Afar people, straddling the borders of Djibouti, Eritrea, and Ethiopia, are predominantly found in Ethiopia. The prominence of the Azaz Sultanate makes Ethiopia the true home of the Afar. Thus, the Red Sea coasts bordering the Afar land, the southern section of the Eritrean and the northern section of the Djiboutian coasts, should be part of Ethiopia. In this analysis, the first two, geography and demography, are treated together as inseparable components of political geography. The ethnic dimension is considered separately because, a. some of its particulars imply an infringement on the sovereignty of neighboring countries and, b. falsified historical narratives are used to manipulate the position of cross-border communities. The main goals of this study are, 1. To improve understanding and provide a broader perspective about the type and degree of isolation existing in the Horn of Africa, and to emphasize that the challenge of sea access is only one of many manifestations of the isolation affecting all states and communities in the region. 2. To outline recommendations on reducing inter- and intrastate isolation and improving sea access within the context of regional cooperation. Despite a broad question of political geography and deserving a comprehensive outlook, Ethiopia's quest for sea access has been looked at in isolation and mainly in terms of developmental challenges. It has also been used as a political tool to build public perception that resolving the issue of sea access is a panacea that would answer all of Ethiopia's challenges. To demonstrate that the issue of sea access is a consequence and not a causal factor, we combine key elements of physical and social geography and underline that sea access falls short of providing a silver bullet. Our analysis and recommendations are guided by the core principle that respect for international laws and norms, and sovereignty and territorial integrity of nations should be the foundation for regional peace and stability. 1.0 Geoclimatic conditions and coastal hinterland dynamics driving isolation. Is Ethiopia a prisoner of geography, and, if so, to what extent, and what does it have to do with sea access? To answer these and related questions, in this section, we attempt to look at geographical isolation in its broader context and explore its determinants and how it manifests in the Horn of Africa. We also investigate the interlink between geography and demography, which are part of the main arguments used by Ethiopian elites regarding equitable sea access in the Horn of Africa. In this section we briefly describe the geoclimatic environment of the Horn of Africa, which sets the foundation for the main socio-natural differentiations existing in the region. The Horn of Africa forms the easternmost extension of the African continent, with the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden separating it from the Arabian Peninsula. It forms a peninsula hugged by the coastal areas of the modern state of Somalia in the south, Arabian Sea and Gulf of Aden, and the Red Sea in its northern section. It is shaped by two great geographic features, the Nile River Valley and the Great African Rift Valley, GRV. The high plateaus and rugged volcanic mountains in Ethiopia and extending to Eritrea are sandwiched between these great features. In south-central Ethiopia, the GRV rises almost to 2000 m above sea level. It drops well below sea level in parts of the Danakil Depression, funneling into the Red Sea and forming the Afar Triangle. The region is mainly under the influence of the monsoon climate system. In combination with the topographic features described above, it underpins the ecology and way of life of the peoples of the Horn of Africa. The east-west separation marks a climatic barrier. The arid lowlands stretching to the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden and northwestern Indian Ocean, RSNWIO, coastal areas form one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. On the other hand, the south and southwestern sections on the other hand register the highest amount of rainfall and are well known for their fertile soils and diverse fauna and flora. The high-altitude mountainous regions and plateaus in the north and northwest also enjoy moderate to high levels of rainfall. The southern GRV areas have the highest population density, while the eastern lowlands and coastal areas, Afar and Somali regions, are very sparsely populated. Except for the southern equatorial regions, the southeastern section covering most areas occupied by the different Somali clans shares similar physiography and climatic conditions as the Afar lowlands. Geoclimatic separation is the primary driver of the different modes of traditional production practiced in the region. Most of the highlands people are settled agrarian, while those occupying the lowlands largely depend on livestock, and to a lesser extent on fishing, for survival. The great geoclimatic diversity is also reflected in the diversity of cultures, marked by the variety of languages, over 200, and dialects. The high diversity of ethnic groups that are further broken down into tribes and clans has created various, some deeply divided, loyalties. On these interactive foundations of the geoclimatic and primordial social arena, the major historical socio-political developments take hold and define the regional socio-political differentiations witnessed to this day. They in turn drive isolation, cooperation, and resource sharing or lack of it. The critical geostrategic position along the RS-NWIO means they can catalyze for broader cooperation as well as inviting conflicts involving external competing powers. The geoclimatic barrier remains a formidable physical challenge and a key driver of the socio-political dynamics defining competition and cooperation, particularly between the various coastal and lowland polities and the Abyssinian state. It also resulted in constant retraction of the Abyssinian centers of power through the centuries, Table 1 below. 2.0 Brief historical context of isolation. The isolation is also defined by three historical phases that compound the physico-climatic isolation. A. The social distance triggered by the expansion of Islam in the lowlands and coastal areas that forced the retraction of the central Abyssinian Empire southward. B. The occupation of coastal areas by Europeans in the late 19th century that fostered nationalist tendencies and solidified the pre-existing socio-political distance. And C. Further concretization of the coastal hinterland separation resulting from the misguided development policies followed during the post-colonial period and its interaction with globalization in recent times. Table 1 shows the distance of the center of the Ethiopian Empire to the closest ports through key periods in history. Addis Ababa, the current government seat and regional hub, is the furthest away in history. Table 1 Abyssinian/Ethiopian seats of power and distance, km, from major ports. Port seat of power Aksum Lalibela Debre Birhan Gondar Mikel Ankober Addis Ababa Adulis 338 400 Misawa Asab 730 641 718 880 Zila 794 777 873 Berbera Djibouti 884 842 736 948 867 Note. Distance was calculated based on modern road networks and does not consider the change in the mode of transportation used at the time. Modern freight trains and trucks carry more loads and take a shorter time to reach destinations than the draft animal transportation used during the Aksumite period. Source: Google Earth and Google Maps. 3.0 The modern post-colonial state and coastal hinterland dynamics. The view on the center-periphery dynamics regarding the modern state in the Horn of Africa, HOA, has been widely shaped by colonial history and post-colonial state building, Marcakis et al. 2021. Colonial undertakings in the HOA were themselves shaped by the unique geoclimatic conditions described in the previous section, which had reinforcing impacts on the colonial isolationist tactics and marginalizations resulting from post-colonial state building. Thus, the post-colonial state in the HOA could be considered more of a special case than the typical sub-Saharan Africa, where the concentration of political and economic power in specific regions, especially capital cities, is adequately explained in terms of links with European markets. Ethiopia, although not directly colonized, its development has been drastically shaped by the way it reacted to European colonialism, and its modern state building is not significantly different from the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. One of the key consequences of European colonialism and the state-building model pursued based on it is that ethnic communities straddling national boundaries have been separated from each other. In some instances, some of them have even faced each other in national wars. At the same time, remotely related groups were brought together to form a single political economy. 3.1 Establishment of Addis Ababa as the capital and center of power in the HOA, colonialism had two profound impacts. First, parts of the former centers of the Ethiopian Empire became either independent states, e.g. Eritrea, or new borderlands, e.g. Tigray, and most of the previous borderlands remained as such, e.g. Afar, Somalia. Second, the Ethiopian Empire expanded southward, and Addis Ababa was firmly established as the capital and the center of power. Based on these facts, various studies have used the distance between Addis Ababa and regional ports to underline the level of isolation and the paramountcy of sea access for Ethiopia's economic well-being, Kasai 2007, Begishaw 2010, Haile Mariam 2011. However, Such calculations are misleading as the longest stretches of the distance between Addis Ababa and regional ports occur inside Ethiopia, Table 2. Considering the 4 closest ports to Addis Ababa, Asab, Djibouti, Zila, and Berbera, 84% of the transportation cost would be incurred inside Ethiopia. The only major population center closer to the border and the ocean is Dire Dawa, with Jijjiga an emerging one. Most of the densely populated areas and economic centers in the states of Oromia, Amhara, and southern Ethiopia also share this remoteness from the sea. This suggests that significant components of the concerns of sea access are found in Ethiopia and the solutions lie there. Hence, distance from the sea as such is not the main barrier to Ethiopia's development. Table 2. Distance from Addis Ababa and nearest Ethiopian border to regional ports. In kilometers. Asab total distance 880 from Addis Ababa, distance from 74.1 the nearest Ethiopian border, percentage of 91.6 distance inside Ethiopia Zila 814 139 82.9 Berbera 929 Djibouti 867 Lamu 1669 179 163 990 Mogadishu 1588 370 80.7 81.2 40.7 76.6 As Table 2 indicates, Addis Ababa is almost at an equidistant position from the Djiboutian, Eritrean and the 2 northern Somali ports, Zila and Berbera. At the same time, the distance to Mogadishu and Lamu is almost double. Except for Lamu, most of the distance between Addis Ababa and the regional ports occurs inside Ethiopia. After considering the total distance, there is no significant difference in the distance between Addis Ababa and the 4 ports closer to it, Asab, Zila, Berbera, and Djibouti. 3.2. Factors other than sea access are more important determinants of economic fate. The flawed conclusion about the isolation from sea access in the HOA originates from the generalized assessments that ignore its multidimensional nature, wealth, stability, and their covariates, and blanket comparison of countries as landlocked versus coastal. Furthermore, the geographic isolation thesis overlooks that coastalization has not yet set foot in the HOA. The existing intense anisotropic situation in the HOA is unique by African and global standards. For example, unlike in West Africa and the rest of the world, in the HOA coastal countries are not in a better economic state than inland areas, if not worse. Unbalanced development has turned even Djibouti, the smallest nation in the region, into a mere city-state. The port rail system, the port of Djibouti and Addis Ababa, dominates the country's economy, making it an extension of the Ethiopian political economy. Eritrea has 2 major ports and the furthest population center, Tessenei, is less than 500 kilometers from the coast, and the distance between Asmara and Massawa is 100 kilometers. The relatively short highland coast distance presents a great potential to develop a diversified and balanced economy in Eritrea, but the country has not fared better. With its expansive coastal areas, Somalia remains one of the least stable countries in the world. It is widely identified as a conflictual state where the dominance of the clan-based traditional system and the nation-building centered on unitary politics have contradicted each other. The absence of coastal landlocked differentiation suggests that the problem lies outside the issue of sea access. This observation supports the thesis that the economic fate of landlocked countries is determined mainly by neighborhood, stability and wealth of neighboring nations, Mehdi 2016, pointing to the fact that landlockedness is a multidimensional issue that cannot be explained by distance from the sea alone. The preceding paragraphs have highlighted the economic component of political geography and the defunct distance-based isolation argument. If that isolation component is primarily an Ethiopian concern, the security side is probably more important. This is because relationships among countries in the Horn remain predisposed to the centuries-old socio-political differentiations and colonial and post-colonial politics that made Ethiopia perceived as a hegemon and a threat in the eyes of most of the coastal states. In that regard, the economic obligation for cooperation and regional integration appears to be dwarfed by the impulsive forces of socio-natural differentiations described in previous sections. In recent years, the region has seen some improvement in that respect, partly backed by the growing mutual dependence between Djibouti and Ethiopia and the latter's enhanced image arising from its positive engagement in the region, e.g. peace missions in Sudan and Somalia. In contrast, the 20-year no peace no war stalemate with Eritrea remained a major stumbling block to regional peace. Recent developments suggest that notwithstanding the early promise, Prime Minister Abiy's adventurous ways, demonstrated by his departure from the pro-poor policies inside Ethiopia to expansionist rhetoric directed at Eritrea and Somalia, seem to be nurturing mistrust. Equally, the ongoing internal conflicts in the country and the involvement of regional forces will have long-lasting negative consequences. 4.0. The ethnic dimension. The post-colonial state in the Hoa is characterized by the presence of various ethnic groups divided between at least two countries. These are also subdivided into various clans and tribes. Ethiopia shares the largest number of ethnic groups with its neighbors due to its unique geographic position described in the first section. All the coastal states in the region have at least one ethnic group that is shared with Ethiopia. For example, the Afar, Kunama, Saho and Tigrinya are found in both Ethiopia and Eritrea. Historically, the ethnic dimension of the sea access argument has focused on two communities, the Afar and Tigrinya. They have been at the center of the Eritrea-Ethiopia relationship at two recent historical junctures: the discussions of the 1940s leading to the federal arrangement and the ongoing quest for sea access by Ethiopia triggered by Eritrea's emergence as a sovereign country. Except for the muted voice within the minority Greater Tigrinya section, presently the Tigrinya-centered argument has no palpable support. 4.1. The Afar-centered argument. The ongoing Ethiopian ethnic discourse, driven by the country's elites, has now shifted its focus to an Afar-centered narrative. If cajoling the Tigrinya to join the motherland and undermining separatist efforts, including through terrorist means, was the main ploy used by Ethiopia in the 1940s and 50s, now the focus has shifted towards the Afar ethnic group. The maneuvers employed include coaxing disenfranchised Eritrean Afar and instilling expansionist ambitions amongst Ethiopian Afar elites, as owners of Asab. The Afar-centered ethnic affiliation argument has various versions. First, Asab was historically Ethiopian. Second, most Afar are in Ethiopia, hence, all Afar are Ethiopian, and by extension, the southern section of the Eritrean coast must belong to Ethiopia. Third, the Azza Sultanate and its sultan, located in Ethiopia, are the most prominent, and the other Afar sultanates are subordinates or feudatory to Azza. The following statement, allegedly attributed to Sultan Ali Mira, is repeatedly posed to assert the Ethiopianness of the Afar. Every Afar knows that his/her border extends to the Red Sea, let alone the people, Afar. Even our camels recognize the Ethiopian flag. However, the great Sultan was pragmatic enough to recognize regional and global changes at the time. The radical stance he took during the latter parts of the imperial Ethiopian government and the early years of the Derg reveals a great level of dissatisfaction he had with the centralized Ethiopian system. There are testimonials by Eritrean fighters, especially senior leaders of the Eritrean Liberation Front, ELF, that Eritreans liberation fighters traversed Azza territories and met with Azza representatives abroad with tacit recognition of the Sultan. Afar movements, including the Afar Liberation Front, founded by the same Sultan himself, also had clock-loose cooperation with Eritrean liberation fronts. 4.2. Afar, traditionally organized into independent sultanates, the Afar occupy a very strategic area in the Hoa, spanning from the coastal areas of Djibouti and Eritrea to the eastern rims of the Abyssinian Plateau and sections of the Awash Valley. In Ethiopia, they share borders with various ethnic groups: Tigrayans in the north, Amhara, northwest, Oromo, southwest, and Isa Somalis, south and southeast. The center of the Afar moved through the centuries from place to place, reflecting its dynamic nature. Pankhurst, 1997. For centuries, the Afar have exhibited both cooperation and rivalry, including conflicts and deadly wars with neighboring communities and polities, and mostly with the center of the Abyssinian Empire in Shoa. Pankhurst, 1997, Markakis, 2021, and none more so than there.